I need help. I need help. I need help. I need help. I can't. I can't do this anymore. I can't. I just can't. I'm having a crisis about this video. This is my second iteration of it, and I started working on this timeline where I was comparing the art that's in Elden Ring to the art of real-life statues and obelisks and architecture and alphabets and everything, and it doesn't stop. And it's gotten to the point where I've hit France and Spain and the UK and Asia and China, Japan, Asia Minor, just fucking all over the place. I've hit everything. I've hit it all. I've hit every fucking civilization up to the 1600s, and I'm losing my fucking mind. The only things that I can't find are Aztec and Incan and Mayan architecture, but there's that Brazilian folklore with the eyeball plant that's even in the game, so it's really difficult for me to even want to stop, like, looking. And it's getting to the point where it's actually taking up a lot of my free time after my 40-hour-a-week job that I have, my adult job that I have, and it's driving me a little bit nuts. So, you know, we're just gonna have a crisis. I'm gonna have my dancing alien guys to keep me company, to keep the levity going. Dancing to Dragon Quest while we talk about ancient history and prehistory. So before I talked about the Silurian era and the Ordovician era. Ordovician. Whatever. This one that I can't pronounce is the one where fungus appears, and the fungus is really weird. It is tall like a tree. It's really weird and kind of creeps me out. It's also the era in which tectonic plate movements happened so bad and so big that it actually created a lot of the mountaintop peaks that we know and love today. The tallest mountains, in fact, were created during this period. Another really cool era is the Silurian era, which is when we get terrestrial vascular plants that have vascular tissue that are able to produce fruit. So that's pretty cool, especially because the Crucible Knights have these naming conventions, and the Silurian era has like a tree crown, a tree helmet, so you love it. You love to see it. Little references. That was like almost 500 million years ago. We need to rewind several million years into early human prehistory. Ancient history, not prehistory. Prehistory is this stuff. We're talking about early human history. Here's the Stone Age when we are really dumb and we don't have language. We don't know how to use tools. We're like super dumb. Maybe we use like a stick or a rock, but for the most part we just like are big dumb idiots, and that's established in Elden Ring by the era of the dragons and the beasts. They talk about how beasts didn't have intelligence and so they used rocks or something. But for the most part, that's pretty much it. There's a lot of myths about this era too, in like our human history, and like modern, like real life humans, not Elden Ring humans. We have a lot of myths about this age regarding how you know, man man was in the Garden of Eden and we ate an apple and then we gained knowledge, the knowledge of God and of our own sin and shame and a bunch of other stuff. In Greek mythology, there's Prometheus, who gave us the fire of knowledge. There's a lot of myths about us gaining knowledge and bad shit happening. Oh, the Tower of Babel falling because we got too close to God, because we built too good and our language was all unified and too good, and so God was like, none of that, and split us up. There's a lot about, although that wasn't Stone Age. That wasn't Stone Age era. That was referring to Sumerians and Babylon. But anyway, what's happening right here? What's happening? Who are the Sumerians? Why are they important? Why do they come after the Stone Age, and why are they so important? Well, it's because they're the creators of modern civilization as we know it. They were the first ones who came up with cuneiform, which is one of the first alphabets, and it was actually used to establish laws and to tell stories about our ancestors and about conquest, or it was sometimes used to talk about how many grains of rice we sold, how many cows we had. It was used for really practical things. And the neat thing about cuneiform is that it actually shows up in Elden Ring in multiple places. It shows up in the Palace of Ould on any of the obelisks and steels. A couple of other images that show up on the steels refer to other cultures as well. We have what looks like Minoan culture right here. We have a good old Nordic Viking Yggdrasil root tree motif over here with some beasts kind of tangled up in the roots. This is Mycenean, the Lion's Gate that sits outside of the Mycenean palace or citadel. And it looks like it's accompanied by the primordial flame or the primordial current on top of this little thingy that they have. I don't know, I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we also, you know, we have the obelisk. And the really interesting thing is that this specific obelisk is definitely modeled after the black obelisk that's from Sumer, but the images are different. So the artist, the concept artist, or whoever worked on this 3D model made a point to copy this obelisk down to the cuneiform that's at the base of this shit. Like, there's cuneiform right there. But this artist was like really on point. They were like, I really want to copy this obelisk, but then the images are ever so slightly different. Same with the Mycenean references too. And it actually looks like it depicts ships coming over from like across the sea. A couple of people tending to a tree or tending to multiple trees. Some kind of ceremony that either looks like a baptism, maybe the preparation of like a dead body. I'm not quite sure, but it looks like several people standing around a table. This looks like people in front of an altar, and then this is actually a series of columns with statues between them that you can actually find down in the Lake of Rot, which is really cool. There's some like little in-game hints and references in this, in these little clues. So kind of after the Sumerian culture, there was the Assyrians and the Akkadians. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their name right. But there was also Babylonia. And they took over like a lot of land. They took over a lot. The Babylonian Empire was fucking massive. And they actually snagged up some people from Israel, or what is now Israel. And those people, even though they were swooped up by Babylon, they were able to preserve their language, and they were also able to preserve their alphabet. And they began writing in biblical Hebrew around 1200 BCE. And from 1200 BCE all the way to 100 BCE, they started working on scripture. So it was a long period of time that they wrote. But during this period, and the development of this alphabet, there's the conversation about how God is depicted both in language, like in the scripture, and then also in art. And it is constantly referred to as like the hand of God, or the fingers of God. And the fingers or the hand of God would commune by making impressions on stone tablets. So for example, Moses got the 10 Commandments effectively written by God. Fuck is happening? Hold on, I just got a weather alert that just popped up on my screen. Hold on. That was so weird. I got a weather alert and it just showed fire. It like popped up on my screen. It was just like this. It was like 60 degrees. Fire. What's happening? Okay, so anyway, there's the hand of God, and yeah, it's pretty common for the fingers of God to leave impressions on shit, and typically that is like the language of God or God's new law or decree. And it's really cool because good old Elden John, who we know and love, somebody actually described him as like, oh, when I first saw him, I thought of Moses holding the 10 Commandments. That's actually closer of a guess than you might think, because the tarnished archaeologist actually pointed out that the tablet that's at his foot is the map of Babylon. So that actually makes sense, because during the period that Babylon had, you know, some Israelites and they're writing their scripture is around the time that they were writing about Moses, possibly. There's a lot going on there. And there's also another little tricky thing with language. Moses was also accredited to be a really famous alchemist, like a really famous ancient alchemist. And I think he got conflated with Moses the prophet. So there's a lot going on there. A lot of people like to see this man as kind of like, you know, maybe he's like the early dynast, maybe he's a prophet, whatever. I definitely see him as more of a prophet figure, because of the era that he falls in regards to like the tablet and other stuff. I also want to point out too, Zeostorm actually made a post about this on Twitter earlier, but go watch Zeostorm's videos. But even though this is referring to the hand of God and the fingerprints and the impressions of God, the inspiration for that pattern actually comes from an ancient tomb in France that is like a big monolith, but it doesn't have to do with the fingerprints of God at all. So this is the one instance in which I feel like they use artistic inspiration to give a sense of like time. So the reason why they chose this tomb to be representative of the three fingers specifically is because this tomb is like fucking ancient. This tomb is like in France around the same time that you know, the Sumerians are posted up. The tomb kind of lands around this area, like maybe 3500 BCE. So it's at the dawn of man, but it's just in a different locale, and it's not through an alphabetical language. It's through like a very like fluid, you know, I think that there is something that Miyazaki is saying here with this distinction between cultures that have a written language and this distinction between cultures that use shapes, motion, and nature to communicate. Another really important thing that I want to, like a little tangent that I want to go off of in regard to this, is that even in Scandinavian art, there was a lot of spirituality expressed through symmetry, and through motion and through nature. There's a lot of patterns in nature that tend to like repeat themselves, and whether that's like the passage of time, like the seasons repeating themselves, people getting older, dying, being reborn. There's a lot that ancient people were able to infer about the natural order of like the world that is represented in their art, that's represented in like their early literature, and starts to show up in their belief systems. And you love to see it because it also pops up in Elden Ring as well. So, woo! Great. Beautiful, spicy, love it. So now let's take a brief break from Mesopotamia. We're stopping right here. Or I guess, no, let's keep talking about Moses. Let's keep talking about the tablets and stuff. So, in addition to the Tarnished Archaeologists mentioning that it's the map of Babel, something that's super important about this map is that it's actually the introduction to trigonometry. Scientists discovered that the purpose of this clay tablet was that it is the world's oldest and most accurate trigonometric table, possibly used by ancient mathematical scribes to calculate how to construct palaces and temples and how to build canals. The new research shows that the Babylonians beat the Greeks to the invention of trigonometry and the study of triangles by more than 1,000 years. We start to see really complex math and architecture forming. The Palace of Ould, in addition to being inspired by the Sumerians, the Scandinavian cultures, and the people that are in the Mediterranean, it's also got some other influences too. We have Jordan, the architecture in Jordan that is influencing the Palace of Ould and the Ould Labyrinth ruins. Any of this stuff shows that this architecture predates the Nox Eternal Cities. And a huge reason why I say that is because the Nox Eternal Cities are actually very, like, distinguished Gothic architecture. And I'm gonna get into the Goths as, like, they're like a nomadic group that end up taking over, like, the Roman Empire. Or taking over what was, like, the Roman Empire was, like, already in decline. They end up taking it over, and then, you know, their civilization then starts creating Gothic style architecture, which is inspired by Germanic and Scandinavian stuffs, because they kind of occupied that area. But you can see that there's a very clear technological difference between this, very detailed, you know, there's buttresses. Buttresses, like, are, you can't, there's actually no, I can't really see. I guess this is just a slanted roof. If I can find a buttress, I'll show you. But Gothic architecture typically has on the outside buttresses and spires. Here's a spire. There's lots of columns and shit. But on the inside, they have vaulted ceilings, which are like these diamond patterned, but they're also arched. You know, it's the same shit. There's also lots of cool cathedral-y type stained glass shit. And you can actually go up into the city, Eternal City of Noxtella, near one of the big thrones. There's like a big cathedral room that the throne's sitting in. So this is very modern. This is like super modern. This is like, we're not even in the BCE anymore. We're in the Common Era now, and we are, you know, 1000 to 12, you know, 1200 CE at this point. So this is super modern. The Eternal Cities is very advanced. So that's why I'm saying all this architecture and the language and the alphabets that they use predates a lot of shit. Predates Marika, predates you know, whatever. Something else that's really interesting about the Palace of Wold is that it spans all the way from Liurnia to Caelid. If you actually take a look at how far the ruins span between the labyrinth that's on the top side of Liurnia and all the Ionsel and the Shiofra river wells, you can see any of the ancient obelisks and any of the old style architecture like this. It's like the entire lands between. It's literally like the biggest landmass. It's not as divided and it's not small compared to all the other civilizations that we know in more modern Elden Ring history time. But something really cool is that there's this story about the Tower of Babel that has fallen to pieces, and it is a story about a group of people, a society, a civilization, and they all speak one language and they're all unified, and through their unification they're able to build a tower that is able to take them up to God. And it kind of is that cautionary tale of feeling like humans can transcend or ascend and will eventually be punished by our own hubris, and the tower will come crumbling down, and God eventually divides us and gives us different languages and different civilizations, and prevents us from building upwards towards the sky and instead building outwards. A little bit of a cautionary tale about God, but also a tale about city planning and I guess not building towers, but we do that now anyway, so sucks to suck. God? We're gonna build skyscrapers, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what I was trying to say with that. Anyway, so in the Mediterranean, this is actually something I messed up on my first video. I was talking about Minoan cultures that lived on the island of Crete. However, I got it conflated with the Myceneans because eventually the Myceneans do take over the island of Crete and the rest of South Greece, what is now Greece. But the Myceneans are super interesting because they have a citadel, a big palace that's here. And the Myceneans is what I wanted to say, have the Palace of Knossos, which the Palace of Knossos is actually supposed to be the labyrinth that the Minotaur wanders in, like in mythology. But it's actually just like a normal palace, and it's a little bit sprawly and labyrinthian, but it's not like the most confusing thing ever. But there's this myth about a like half human, half cow that wanders the labyrinth and all this other stuff. But it's really cool because we have the ancestral followers who hang out in the old palace labyrinth on the top side of Liurnia. And they're really interesting because the ancestral followers actually abstain from the use of language and metalworking. So language and metalworking are actually super important in human history. Obviously, it's like the birth of our ability to create technology and tools and language and the alphabet and share ideas and share gods and share spirituality and da-da-da-da-da-da. But they abstain from that, and through that they're able to become ancestral spirits that then become trees. So they nourish the spiritual aspect of their souls, but they don't necessarily nurture the fire of ambition. I talked before about blue and red in a previous video that is now unlisted because I want to redo that video, but I do think that nourishing the soul results in the blue ancestral spirit, whereas nourishing the body and language and humanity and the fire of ambition results in like the blood or the magma or the fire of humanity. I'll talk about it again another time. But it's cool that there's this reference to the Minoan people, the labyrinth, the Palace of Knossos, and all that other stuff. But over time, they do get occupied by, and they lose their independence by the Myceneans in the 1600s. I guess this one says the 1400s, so my bad. But yeah, so Myceneans build this really cool citadel, and the citadel has these two lions that protect the gate. We see Siraj kind of as like an image quite a bit, as like this protector or this being that keeps Godfrey in check, but also is like the symbol of the Round Table Hold. Mycenean culture and lions, it's like pretty distinguishable, pretty important, pretty iconic. We also see it down in the Undercities in the Ul Palace ruins with the two lions facing each other. But in this image, it's actually quite interesting. It looks like they might be... I don't want to say stabbing a bird. I don't want to say stabbing a bird because y'all know how I feel about the twin birds and like birds and Elden Ring in general. But this is very weird. This whole image is very weird to me, and I feel like there's more to it. I feel like there's a little secret. But we have what looks like the primordial current, maybe a lotus blossom, maybe a bloom, the bloom of a flower. And then like this pole that the lions are holding onto as they stab into the earth. So I don't know what the fuck that's supposed to mean. But hey, we're here, Mycenean culture. So there's like this era right after the Mycenean downfall where there's like dark ages. Like there's a lot of reasons as to why this could have happened. Archaeologists agree that it might be multiple things, but it for the most part is a mystery. It's probably like multiple environmental impacts all happening at the same time. But there's the dark ages where a lot of populations decline dramatically, major cities cease to exist, and the literacy disappeared for the next 300 years. That's so long without written language and without the communication of ideals and spirituality and like storytelling. Obviously there is oral myth and oral storytelling, but we're missing a lot of the written accounts of things. Whereas the Sumerians were actually very meticulous, almost like accountants. They always kept information about like how much cattle they had and whatever the fuck, you know? But a lot was lost during the Greek Dark Ages, and there became little myths about forms of architecture and other stuff. One of the myths is that the Mycenean architecture was actually built by cyclopses, by giants who were like fucking massive and had the strength to pick up massive rocks. And that's where they believed a lot of this architecture came from, and it's actually called Cyclopes architecture. Yeah, so it's any architecture that has massive mounds of disorganized, kind of uneven stones that looked like a giant would have picked up. It's not across all cultures, specifically like in the Greek areas. But obviously giants are like, you know, there's giants in all cultures. What the fuck is my cursor doing? Whatever, we in it now. We have a scrolly wheel now. Obviously there's giants in Scandinavian and Nordic cultures, with the fire giants and the frost giants, the creation of the world, but we also have our cyclopses, and we have all that other stuff, and they all get kind of overlapped into the fire giants. The fire giant is both a fire giant from Nordic and Scandinavian mythology, but he's also a cyclops. He has a singular eye in the center of his body, and across all these different cultures, cyclopses and giants tend to be very slow, very dumb, but are also incredible architects, smiths, metal workers, blacksmiths, whatever. And we see that again in Elden Ring, although not all of them are lumbering and dumb. E.g. is like a war counselor, so it's pretty cool to see the neat different ways that they're all depicted. It's cool. I love it. And then also I want to talk a little bit about the Bronze Age. There's some other stuff going on here too. We got Boer era art. For those of you unfamiliar, it's B-O-R-R-E. They have like buggy-eyed animals, and it freaks me the fuck out. I don't like it. But we also see some Scandinavian metalworking and some buggy-eye crows in the branch sword. But this is the most confusing item to me because the Vikings and people in Japan never really met before. There's not a lot of historic evidence that they ever crossed paths. However, this branch sword is really similar to ones found in Japan, like a ceremonial sword, where as the knotwork and a lot of the finer details in this are very Scandinavian. So kind of confusing. Have a lot of twin birds during this time because Odin had two birds that acted as his eyes. It reminds me of the two cuckoo, although I feel like the two cuckoo are also representative of alchemical symbolism, which I'll get to. We're getting there. We're getting there. So, I kind of mentioned before about the two fingers and all that other stuff. Eventually, like, emperors and rulers get around the whole, like, well, we're not going to depict our gods visually, so we're just going to depict our gods crowning us visually. So then that way we're still, like, the authority figure in this situation. Here's a little hand putting a crown on. I think this is Constantine. Maybe it's somebody else. But yeah, there's a lot of that. You see a lot of that in Rome, and you see a lot of that in certain medieval civilizations of like a hand coming down from the clouds putting a crown on somebody's head, and therefore they're the new divine law. But ooh, I'm gonna knock some shit over. We also, with the fire of creation, we see a lot of these amazing like things happen. We see human rights being discussed. We see law and language and people's fair share. We see accounting. We see, you know, myths and storytelling. We see a lot of these really wonderful creative innovations and stories. But we also start seeing instances in which fire and technology are used for like mass destruction. And I think that goes into the symbolism of fire being all-consuming and dangerous. It's like a creative and nourishing force. It cooks our food and it does all this, you know, amazing stuff for us, but at the same time it's also embodies like so much more. And there was actually Greek fire in 1672 CE, where the Greeks would actually put a bellow along with some pumps and oil and a I think it's a bronze nozzle, and a match or a lamp, and it would effectively create a moving flamethrower. Typically they were placed on the front of ships and they could set ships on fire. In this iteration of it, it looks like they put it on a little chariot, and I double checked like the wheels and some of this stuff, and it definitely looks like a trebuchet a little bit, but they have the little bellow right here. You could actually get really close and see like all the little mechanics of it. And it's almost really interesting. The fire giant almost looks like it's wearing like a crown of thorns. So there's a lot of interesting symbolism happening here with the fire giants, and maybe sin, punishment, destructive fire. You know, like the story of Ragnarok talks about like a fire that's going to destroy the tree in the age of the gods and stuff. In Elden Ring, it's like it's mankind's fire, or it's the giant's fire that's going to destroy the age of the gods. But the giants seem to be like more like passive people in this. It almost seems like that prophecy was, the prophecy ends up being self-fulfilling because we end up fucking it all up anyway. But the giants seem to be just chilling, and then Marika was like, I'm scared of this prophecy, fuck you. And then the fire giants were like, okay, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens that I can't keep up with. And this is kind of the part of the video where I get really sad, because there is so much in Asia that is represented. Some of the first fire and cannons were in the 12th century, or what am I saying? 1200 BC? I'm pretty sure. There's a lot of really amazing stuff that's happening in Asia at this time. We also have the nomadic falconers and the wandering traders who travel the equivalent of the Silk Road in the 900 CE. this dude has this instrument that was created around 960 CE. Sorry, my brain is like flatlining at this point. They also would use their falcons to help them hunt, but in Elden Ring, Sekiro Dubi realized that they actually utilized the falcons to send messages to each other, and this runic alphabet right here, I believe, is the same runic alphabet that those like content creators deciphered and found out that it was a long lost dialect from the Yi tribe, I believe. So really interesting stuff. This line of blue sticky notes that says Christianization was kind of like the spread of Christianity across all cultures. Historically, this is like where that is in the timeline, which is a point of history. It's a point of history. And then we start to get kind of like Enlightenment period, but also early alchemy in the 1500s, and SMB on youtube.com mentioned that the 1600s is when the earliest telescopes were built. So it's really interesting because the Academy of Raya Lucaria is actually one of the more advanced buildings in the game. I would say Volcano Manor is pretty advanced as well. It's because it's a manor. It's not like a big cathedral castle building. It's a little bit more it's a bit, I don't know, it's a little fancy, but it's got rooms like an actual estate, or like a manor, not like a church or like an academy. I don't know how to describe it. It seems more modern. We were talking about it. He was asking me when I thought the buildings were made, and I would say probably Byzantine, because chandeliers weren't a thing until like the Byzantine era. There's hella chandeliers in Volcano Manor. There's also hella chandeliers in Raya Lucaria. Fuck. I don't know. Those buildings are very modern, very new, fun and fresh, funky fresh. But around this time, alchemists were using code because they didn't want other alchemists to steal their codes, their work. But there was also pressure from the church to not engage in alchemy because there was this idea that whoever had the Philosopher's Stone, or whoever had like these, you know, really important alchemical findings, controlled everything. Like, you can control the market, you can create gold out of nothing, you can, you know, you can do all this really amazing stuff. But it also gave you a lot of creative power. And there was, I was talking to somebody in the comments about this. There was actually a pope who outlawed certain alchemy practices because there was this threat between like the church and, you know, like creation, and how alchemy just kind of was in conflict with man being kind of like God. There's all those stories about flying too close to the sun and building the Tower of Babel and blah 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 blah, you know, being too close to God, that I think the church feared. But there was also a lot of like health risks at this time too. Alchemy was also outlawed because if you did something wrong, you could potentially like poison gas yourself. It just was not the safest practice ever. But yeah, so there's a multitude of reasons as to why people kept that shit secret from other people. But they used the Kabbalah and a lot of other spiritual and kind of like early mysticism to code their like early chemistry findings. So, for example, if you want to, you know, let something sit in water to dissolve its like chemical properties for 7 days, you might, you know, depict a green lion that has like 7 red stars, and then on the 7th day your chemical mixture will turn red, and like that's how you know that like you need to add the next step, or that you're like at the point in the process in which you're able to do more chemistry shit, whatever. But obviously there's a lot of imagery that depicts the sun and the moon and a conjoined child that just looks a little funky, a little misbegotten, maybe a little Mikola. Maybe Mikola is Mercury, you know, maybe. I have feelings about that, which I talked about in my metals video. I talked about how Mikola is Mercury. Anyway, going back, some cool things in the Kabbalah is that there is sacred geometry that talks about a shape called the flower of life, and it is created by layering several circles over and over and over. And if you layer them correctly, you can actually create the tree of life out of the flower of life, and blah 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 blah. This is the tree of life right here. Flower of life is 6 circles that are placed in like a really careful arrangement. So this is the flower, this is the tree. Something really cool though, once again, revisiting the Miranda powder. It is the flower that has the tree of life inside of it. And I think that's why we have those images, or that like language calling Miranda the crucible of the flowers, and then we have the crucible of the Erd tree, and how they're related to each other. You'll love to see it. It's really cool. It's cool mysticism. I don't know what it means. There's Celestial Dew. Check it out. Check out Zeostorm video. Check out history. I'm gonna make this board public so y'all can add to it. I think that's all I wanted to say. I think my big takeaway from Miyazaki's whole shit, his whole thing, is that ancient humans notice patterns in the natural world. We depict them through art, through spirituality, through early sciences. When we create language, it allows us to create law, communicate ideals, discuss human rights. Through fire, commerce, spirituality, war, and art, humans are able to trade this knowledge and grow. Our language starts to overlap, our myths start to overlap, the symbolisms start to overlap. Early chemists come under scrutiny by the church, by each other, and there is this mankind's pursuit of knowledge and human ascension that has its own issues, ownership, ethics, who has the right to the Philosopher's Stone. You know, I think that we even have these questions in modern day times in regard to the internet and social media. Who deserves to have this power? What are they going to use it for? How many advertisements do we have to sit through every day? How much targeted social media is making our brains fucking anxious and depressed as hell? There's a lot. There's a Pandora's box of technology that we're constantly opening on ourselves, and it doesn't stop, and by the time that it's already open, we ask ourselves these questions. So I love this wild ride that we're all on. It's great. Anyway, this video is going to be a 40-minute long one. Have a good night, everybody. It's 11 p.m., so thankfully it's not that late. I didn't record that long. So I'm going to take a long break from recording videos, maybe 2 weeks, because I really want to focus on my commissions. I want to stream Cult of the Lamb more. Follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. I'm going to be active on social media. I'm going to be active on Twitch. I just need a break from recording and writing scripts and organizing information, because I feel like Selene becoming an orb. And I was having fun in my orb era. I was really vibing and having a good time, but now I'm feeling a little burnt out. I need to go back to being a human for a little bit. Alright, everybody. Good night, goodbye, thank you.